Japanese games should stay Japanese. Plain and simple, they should not be westernized. It is that simple. There was an article that recently was released with Masahiro Sakurai where he had a interview with Intax. Now, recently Masahiro Sakurai, as you can see here, this was as posted by Nintendo Life, as recently got an award of the Art Encouragement Prize from the Japanese government's Agency for Cultural Affairs. For those who really need a reminder, of course, Masahiro is the creator of Super Smash Bros. If you haven't heard of that game, maybe you should get out from under that rock that you were living in, because you are clearly living under one if you have not heard of Super Smash Bros. Of course, very popular game that first released on N64, Nintendo 64, and has had an iteration pretty much on every mainline console, Nintendo console, up to date, including most recently the Switch. So of course we'll probably see another iteration or maybe just a higher port onto the Switch 2 that's coming up at some point during this year. There's a direct next month in April that highlights the Switch 2, so we're looking forward to that. But nonetheless, Masahiro Sakurai was asked during this interview how Japan can keep up with the booming gaming markets in regions such as China. Sakurai simply stated, "It's not really my own idea, but as an industry trend, I think Japanese people should keep pursuing things that Japanese people like." And so he goes on further to say that pretty much, don't bend to the Western will in the regards of gaming. And this is exactly what it should be. This is exactly what it should be, because Western players do not want their games to be westernized. Like, Western players who play these Japanese games, they're playing it because they're the uniqueness. And that's what he says here as well. We're playing it for the uniqueness of that different experience. We don't want a westernized experience in these games. Now, of course, that gets tricky because as a business, you try to reach out and you're trying to broaden out, and you want to make your game more appealing for a certain type of audience, right? But this doesn't always work in that way that you would think it might work out or that you want it to work out. Sometimes it's the exact opposite of what should be being done. And so he goes on to say that the success of Japanese games in the West had led many teams in the region to join a growing trend of making Americanized works. However, he doesn't necessarily believe that Western gamers are looking for this, stating, "I think that they seek the uniqueness and fun of Japanese games." And this is entirely correct. By the way, you can find the actual article over here. I did check it, and this is what they said. This is what's properly translated. This is what he is saying. And you can just flat out understand that he has come to this conclusion that, yo, dude, let's keep these things the way that we were doing them, because these people who want this experience overseas in these different countries want the experience of what we are delivering. They don't want the experience of a experience saturated down to what their localization, westernized, whatever viewpoint necessarily might be. No, that's not. And let's face it, Western gaming companies have not really been up to par as of late, in a large part. Let's be honest. We've seen China emerge very heavily in theirs, as we've seen a lot of questionable decisions within the Western market. And the one thing that the Japanese do have bad in this regard is that they have invested a lot. Most of these game companies have invested a lot in westernized like views, or in westernized people, like departments, to kind of tell them what the westernized market might want. So they might have, like, I guess, like consulting. They might have maybe a few people who are kind of over this, and so then these few people who might have a biased view, not really understanding the full picture, but they have this biased view, and then they kind of, okay, this is what the westernized market wants, and that might not be the case, and a lot of times it's not the case. So you have to keep that in mind, that a lot of these companies already have it. So I think this is kind of a big thing. This is also why Nintendo's always very successful, because Nintendo tends to stay true to itself. So you don't see Nintendo really have these types of hiccups much, because Nintendo really kind of does its own thing, and so you don't really see that happening with Nintendo very much. But in regards to other, Japanese video game companies, you do see this a lot, and I think that there's this kind of doing a period right now where there needs to be some restructuring and maybe kind of reevaluate, yo, people in the West want these Japanese games for the Japanese games is what they are, the uniqueness of what they are. Then Western games can be Western games. You can expect the Western games to be Western games. You shouldn't expect the Japanese games to be Western influence. It really shouldn't be that way. I think this is the correct outlook, the correct thought point from Sakurai. And then further down here to note during this article, which isn't directly pertaining to this, is something that they kind of wrote, but his comment comes at an interesting time for Silent Hill fans, of all people. Though not relevant for the Switch, so they say, well, maybe it comes on Switch too. But pretty much they're getting at here that they recently stated that the Silent Hill was based in the West for the longest time, and it felt like the Japanese influence was fading. As such, the latest entry will be the first to take place solely in Japan. So you can see that some of these companies are starting to kind of come back to that roots. And I think that this is the proper thing to be doing. I think that the gaming industry has gotten a little lost in that regard. I think that you take these things from these different regions of the world, be their different regions of the world, and contribute and bring the unique flavor to the different regions of the world. You don't need to mesh them in and try to bend to how this current region is being, or how this current region is being. You don't need to really do that, because we play these games to experience those differences as video game players. Video game players largely in part, we like to experience these different things. That's why we play video games. And it kind of allows us to have a broadened mindset with that type of stuff, to kind of dive into like a different world, right? So I think that this is the proper way of thinking about this, and Sakurai is right on the money with this. Like I said, once again, Nintendo usually doesn't have these types of issues. So, this isn't really something big for them anyway. Like I said, they tend to steer their own lane. Don't really care what anyone else is doing. They're going to do. They've been around for 100+ years. Nintendo has, since the 1800s. So, they're going to do what they do. Plain and simple. But nonetheless, what do y'all think about this whole situation? And what do y'all think about Western games, or what do y'all think about Japanese games having this Western influence to it? Like, bending to that, bending the kind of Japanese games to satisfy, a Western viewpoint or whatnot. Instead, just kind of focusing on doing what, the Japanese will appreciate in the games. That uniqueness, that quirkiness of what that Japanese game is. And, just kind of letting it flow outwards into that motion. Create the games for that environment, for that culture, for that Japanese culture that you were intending to create it for. That when you first had that vision, you first dived in, this is how you wanted to create it. And then once you start going further in, you get all these layers of, oh, well, we need to change this to make it more Westernized. So and so and so. I think that's problematic. So what do y'all think about this? Let me know down below in the comments. Be sure to like and subscribe, and I will see y'all in the next one. Much love, Paul.
Spikes content.